In World War III, the United States gets a great gift. It gets something handed to it. What is it? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angles made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, there's a story in ZeroHedge.com about, based on information provided by someone in the Rand Corporation, they do this wargaming thing. They've been doing it for years, and it comes under the headline, and I'd like to quote directly, and I invite our editor to bleep anything that seems bleepable. But the headline says, U.S., that's us, U.S., quote, gets its ass handed to it in World War III simulation. Rand. That's attributed to Rand. And the upshot of it is, gentlemen, that according to this expert, that we lose a lot of people, we lose a lot of equipment, we usually fail to achieve our objective of preventing aggression by the adversary. And I want to couch this because I didn't really talk about this in the pregame show, but they're looking into the future as they predict, as they wargame this. So we're looking like 10, 20 years down the line. It doesn't have to do with current capabilities of the Russians or the Chinese, for example. But in these simulated war games, the Red aggressor force, China and Russia, often destroys U.S. F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters on the runway, sends several naval fleets to the depths, destroys U.S. military bases, and through electronic warfare takes control of critical military communication systems. I could go on, but I won't for the moment. But I want to ask you, Stephen Green, we know we're going into budget season here, and this information is coming from a government contractor. Let me just ask it this way. Obviously, these guys it's in their interest to have the United States spend more money on military, and this seems like fear-mongering tactics. But at what point how much of this do you listen to? How do you balance that? You know what I'm saying? How do you say, well, okay, yes, we need to be afraid of what could happen in the future, but obviously these guys are self-interested. How do we expect guys in Congress to figure that out?
Well, one of the problems it isn't that we spend too little on defense. It's that we don't get nearly as much defense as we pay for. We've got a procurement system that is essentially broken in some ways. There have been some success stories like the Virginia-class submarine procurement, which has just gone amazingly well. But for the most part, things are late. They're over budget. The Pentagon can't make up its mind. We have some serious procurement issues, and we have some training issues as well, because we've got this PC military now. We've got to get rid of that stuff. Some of this report, I think, assumes that our capabilities are going to stand still over the next 20 years while the Chinese develop theirs and, hone all these new electronic knives. I don't think that's going to be the case. The really important issue to me, though, is this attitude that we saw. We saw it with the Japanese in 1941. We saw it with Al-Qaeda in 2001. That if you just give us a big bloody nose on day one, that we'll call it quits and go home. And that hasn't, that hasn't proven to be the case. Not after Pearl Harbor. Not after 9/11. Free people have reserves of will, political will, and strength that oppressed societies simply do not possess. And I have a little pet theory. Bear with me here. This is a little involved. People who are gambling addicts aren't actually addicted to the gambling. They're addicted to the losing. Now, they're not aware of this. They're not consciously saying, oh, I'm going to lose. But they will sit there at the card table, at the roulette wheel, at whatever it is, and they will play and play and play. And they will, even if they're up millions of dollars, they will keep playing until they're bust. Now,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. There was a great movie about this, and I can't remember the name of it. It was a true story about a problem gambler in Canada who was pilfering money from his bank. Got up $2 million, enough to pay back all the money that he'd embezzled from his bank, and still sat there and gambled it all away until he was even deeper in hock. And this is how gamblers are. Yamamoto, the Japanese admiral who precipitated the attack on Pearl Harbor, he knew two things. He knew that Japan could only fight the U.S. for about 6 to 18 months, and then it would be essentially over, and not in Japan's favor. And he's also the guy who said, we must attack the United States. And what's not appreciated is in his private life, he was something of a gambler. And it occurs to me that he might have been a gambling addict who bet his entire country on an outcome that he was pretty sure he couldn't win. He sent a letter to a friend of his basically saying that the only way to defeat the United States would be to march on Washington. And think about what that means. Cross 5,000 miles of ocean, cross 3,000 miles of land against a well-armed U.S. populace and all the rest, to force a decision on us in Washington. That was never going to happen. It's not just unlikely, it's almost physically impossible for Japan to have done that. And
we did it.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Do you think China can do that? I know Russia can't do that, but unless you're able to come here and force us to sit down at a table and sign a treaty against our own interests, you can't win a war with us as long as we're willing to fight it. And if you piss us off enough, we are going to fight it and we're going to take it to you.
Now, Bill, granted, wargaming something 10 to 20 years in the future takes a fertile imagination, to say the least. However, it's clear that this is being, sown out there in the media at budget time to build support for a strong U.S. budget. But let's take a look at it. I mean, the United States military budget is already, in rough terms, 3 times that of China. China's is roughly 3 times that of Russia. We have vast amounts of money already being spent on the military. So as a conservative, as a Republican who believes in a strong defense, do you feel like when we go into budget time, our obligation, because we know the opposition we're going to face not just across the ocean, but across the aisle, that our obligation is to get all we can get for the military budget?
It's been, without question, one of the 2 or 3 signal blessings of my career to have been able to be invited to actually go on a nuclear submarine and on an Aegis class destroyer, which happened to be the Spruance, which is a beautiful thing because of Ray Spruance and what he did. So I'm not giving away any inside information here, but let me just give you a sense of what I'm talking about. I don't have access to classified secrets, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you that I didn't. I just said in a casual way when we were on that nuclear sub on the USS Pasadena, I just said on a casual way, so do you guys ever get Russian sonar contacts or Chinese sonar contacts just off the coast? And the guy just kind of laughed a little bit. He said no. No. And the reason he said no, which I deduced, he didn't tell me, but which I deduced, is because starting with the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, which was the area between the United Kingdom, Iceland, Greenland, there were 2 slots basically where the Russian submarine fleet could come down and interdict NATO convoys to resupply Europe at war with the Russians. And starting with that, we laid out a series of sonar devices. I want to say it's SOSUS devices,
yeah, covering the seafloor in the gap.
We basically, and then we decided to do it around the rest of the of the world. We have a sensor net of the ability. We can hear anything that goes on at any time. And the guy's reaction to the idea that an enemy sub would get close enough to be of interest even is the kind of thing that doesn't seem to get factored into these sort of things. I want to say also that another personal experience I had was I was coming back from Toronto, and I was going through U.S. Customs, and all of a sudden I see all these customs guys not panicking, you could just tell they're suddenly getting a little more alert, and they reach down and they pulling out this little device that they had on their belts, and they start walking through this room, and I'm watching this very carefully. This interests me because we got masses of people going through. It's like regular screening at the airport. And finally, they find this person, pull him aside, and I just happened to be close enough to listen to it. And it turned out that this guy had one of these radioactive tracer element medical tests several days before, but it had tipped off our radiation counters. And that conversation led me to other conversations where we, if some radioactive material sells around the Cape of Good Horn, we know about it. Now, I am having studied history, especially military history, for most of my adult life, I understand that overconfidence is the is the enormous enemy of victory. But with that said, we have had 70 years of operating aircraft carriers. We have a Navy that strikes anywhere in the world. We have an Air Force that actually flies combat missions in actual aircraft that are actually running up against actual opponents. And I've got a segment this week, coincidentally, about this very thing. So when you look at capabilities, a person in the RAND Corporation could perhaps game out potential capabilities, but they can't game out the operational tempo and the response of the servicemen and women, and we're the people that actually do that. And I want to just say one more thing about this, because it's very interesting, and this is something I learned from Andrew Breitbart, and that is really look at the question you're being asked before you answer it. Could you just please read again that opening paragraph you said, Scott? Could you just give it to me again, because I caught something that was kind of interesting.
I'm trying to remember which paragraph it was here. Whenever we have an exercise, that one?
When we get our ass handed to us. Can you just read that again?
Yeah, whenever we have an exercise and the Red Force really destroys our command and control, we stop the exercise. That's not the one. Where is it? The Red Aggressor. Here we go. The simulated war games showed that the Red Aggressor Force often destroys U.S. F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters on the runway, sends several naval fleets to the depths, destroys U.S. military bases, and through electronic warfare takes control of critical military communication systems.
Wasn't there something about us not accomplishing our mission? I'm sorry, I don't mean to drag this out or belabor it. Because the assumption that they're going to destroy...
We lose a lot of equipment. We usually fail to achieve our objective of preventing aggression by the adversary.
Okay, so we lose a lot of people, we lose a lot of equipment, and we usually fail to achieve our objective of preventing aggression on the part of the enemy.
Yeah.
Now, if that is our mission, to prevent aggression on the part of the enemy, the second that a Chinese soldier shoots across the border into Russia, we have failed to prevent aggression on the part of the enemy. We've already failed.
That's an awfully broad
So
net, yeah.
if our mission objective is to prevent aggression, and the exercise begins with a sneak attack on American facilities, then yes, I suppose we have failed at our mission to prevent aggression. But the idea that means that F-35s are going to be caught on the ground and all of our subs are suddenly going to sink is just ridiculous. My point in this is that they have given the American position an utterly impossible objective to meet, because our objective in a case like this would not be to prevent aggression on the part of the enemy. Our objective might be to protect Taiwan or whatever the case may be, but that's not having our ass handed to us. Having our ass handed to us, as Steve said, is having the Chinese flag flying over the Capitol. And my sincere wish would be that the United States Navy would let a few of these transports through, which they don't have in the first place. They can't even get to Taiwan reliably. So come in here, no. But my sincere wish is that the Navy would, just as a gesture of thanks to the American people that have been paying these taxpayers billions of dollars for the defense budget, is that they would let a few transports through, so that those of us who own AR-15s would finally be able to have a chance to get some actual, genuine use out of them. I don't believe any of it, and I don't believe it out of overconfidence. I don't believe any of it because the idea that we're just going to stand still while their cyber team works on our command control structures, while we sit there and say, "Goodness gracious, what's a command and control?"
We invented this stuff.
So what is cyber? What is cyber technology? We'll clutch our pearls and we'll just faint dead away. At which point we'll have to stop the exercise. Okay, sure.
Well, I think that there are fascinating aspects of this, and I say up front, I am no expert in military things. Half the time when Bill and Steve are talking, I think, well, they must be twice as old as me because of the amount of stuff that they've learned. I can't imagine having been able to absorb all this. I will say a couple of things I know about human nature, though. First of all, being able to predict what people are going to do when faced with certain challenges is a virtual impossibility. As the great, the constant proverb about warfare is we're always preparing to fight the last war. Predicting what the next war is going to be like, with tanks is, nearly impossible at that time when they were trying to imagine what the next war was going to be like. Well, what if horses weren't the best way for guys to get around? You just can't imagine going forward that kind of behavior. The other thing you can't take into account very effectively is the politics of it all. Most of the bad things that have happened to our country during the course of war have had to do with not with decisions made on the battlefield, but with decisions made in Washington, D.C. And I'm not saying that all of those guys in Washington always made bad decisions. I'm saying they had a different set of factors that they had to take into consideration. Their battle space was completely different than that one that was being faced by the troops on the ground in the mud-filled trenches. And, even if they gave it their best effort and even if they were smart and had the best intentions, being able to make the right decisions in a political context is more challenging than one might imagine. How do we gauge how much fear-mongering we should absorb as we prepare to put forth or to approve a military budget? I'd say it's darn near impossible to know, because it is too large. It is too, no individual person can grasp it. And I think this is sad to say, but to a certain extent, you have to elect good representatives, hope that they make wise decisions, and hope that the spirit of the American military fighting man and woman rise to the occasion of being able to defend us in time of need. That is what the enemy can't take into account. They can't take into account our politics, and they can't take into account our nature. And our nature is different than people who grew up in collectivist societies. We simply don't have the same kind of will that they have. When the F-35s are destroyed on the runway and the naval fleets are sent to the bottom of the ocean and the military bases are bombed, that's when we get going.
That's right. We don't shut down the exercise. All right, now we're
when
serious.
Our command and control goes dark, that's when we become the most dangerous, because you don't know where we are. And I think that unless you take that into account, the American fighting spirit that's a homogenized, beautiful mix of people from all over the world and their best gifts and abilities, who love an idea and are willing to die for it, that's the central part of American military theory that no enemy ever can adequately take into account. And I think you've seen that throughout history. You will see it in so-called World War III. God forbid that ever should happen. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.